I would say that Uma and Chandrabhan have spelled out everything. They've stolen my thunder. So many questions that were there in my, got answered as you spoke. As I was reading the text and I had certain things in my mind, you had answered. So what I'm going to just talk about is my own, some assessment that I have made of the text. So in a sense, a comment on it. And just one or two questions, certainly not as deep and as lengthy as Chandrabhan's. I'm going to fix it to a point. Okay, so one thing that I was very impressed about, and that is your focus on the points of transition or the phases of transition. I think that for us is so important. As students of history, we are generally looking at huge canvases. We are looking at a huge temporal canvas or the spatial context, and we are reading fluctuations. But then when we start looking at it from a certain perspective of transition, then that particular phase becomes so much more meaningful because it sees the end of one tradition and the beginning of the other, and that to catch those moments, I think you have done a marvelous job in that. And talking about the early India part of it, you're looking at the transition that is coming from the Rig Vedic society, the pastoral society, if I may say, the early Vedic society or the pastoral society, to a more settled one where you have an agrarian settled society in terms of the units. If you look at those, so it's the Vish, from Vish to Jan, from Jan to Janpad eventually, and then to Mahajanpad. So we are looking at the emergence of the state. And what Professor Chakravarti has brought into focus is the simultaneous evolution of the state and patriarchy at the same time. Interestingly, I don't see you using the word patriarchy very often now, but that is what came, and it's the male domination. You're talking about male domination in the state and the male domination in the household. The two are there, and they seem to be working towards the same target, and that is the control over the female sexuality. Sexuality, which you clearly say, is a form of resource that needs to be controlled, and that needs to be controlled as a social formation is changing. When you have sedentism, agrarian production, when you have land to be acquired, then there's the need for lineage to be specified. If there is lineage, then there has to be, and we are talking of a very androcentric society, a son-centric society, where because there has to be a clear focus on who is the son and who is the father. Well, for that to be identified, you have to control the womb of the mother, of the woman. That aspect has come through very, very beautifully, and that you have talked about how it starts coming in the normative traditions, in the narratives also, and in that sense you have brought politics of reproduction to the focus. You do mention G.C. Pandey's questions, that you talk about the question, Shvetaketu's question, the questions that Yudhishthir have raised, and even Arjun. And there, what Professor Chakravarti has shown is that somehow reproduction, which was so important to the entire narrative of the story, it is there. The entire, the bulk of the Mahabharata is actually structured, and it seemed to have got invisibilized in discussions. You talk about Mahabharata, you talk about it as a dharma sahita. So you're talking it about various aspects of dharma of different types. You have the Raj dharma, Apad dharma, Moksha dharma, dharma of Swadharma, Suksham dharma. So many times discussions are there. The importance of war, the justification of war, the familial conflicts, all that is there, up for discussion by philosophers, scholars, historians, but somehow reproduction somewhere has been put on the margins. Probably that is also to do with the fact that, if I may say, historians who are men are very uncomfortable about discussing issues that actually talk about the control over sexuality. And what Professor Chakravarti has informed is that it is the kind of control which is a control over a resource, to identify that as a resource. I think the marvel of our work is to bring it to fore. It is not just, birth is not just a very normal common thing, वो तो होना ही है, बच्चे पैदा होने हैं. नहीं, बच्चे किस तरह पैदा होने हैं, क्या नीति क्या रीति होगी, और उस पर किसका कंट्रोल होगा, वो बहुत important aspects हैं. The foundations of the text, the foundation of the epic is precisely that, and somehow you have been able to pull it out of invisibility onto the center stage and brought it to our notice, and you have then discussed it, how it is intertwined with the Varna politics, with the very fact that it is not just the control over the gender, but it is actually the spelling out of the Varna, the reinforcement of the one. So Professor Chakravarti talks in her work about varied forms of inequalities, iniquities, power structure, and the issue of birth that gets associated with that. And what she talks about is how does this orderly transfer of women's sexuality take place? An orderly transfer of women's sexuality takes place through the institution of marriage. You informed us right now also. And this marriage is interesting because we are talking of a society that is probably seeing a transfer, a change from one mode of social setup to another. We have, not in this text, but otherwise we do talk in terms of incest as being there, the promiscuous horde. If you look at the works of Macklin and others, even Durkheim talks about that. So from there to the exchange of the resource called the daughter in a family as the tribe settled down, and then finally to a ritualized exchange through marriage. Well, we have 8 forms of marriage, and as you correctly said, that probably these are open to primarily to Kshatriyas or to the Brahmins. And yet my interesting intervention here is that despite 8 forms of marriage and Swayamvar, which does not get written as a form of marriage, what is also talked about in detail is an alternative to marriage, and that is niyog. Niyog is a temporary alliance. It does not have, and if you look at it, niyog is an instrument. What exactly is niyog? In case the husband cannot reproduce or dies before the heir has come in or is impotent, the wife is made to cohabit with an individual. जिसकी नियुक्ति होती है, तभी नियोग है. वो is made to cohabit with that individual. The son born out of that alliance is considered to be the son of the husband of the mother. That means not the natural father, but the appointed one. Not the natural father, but the husband of the. So he is carrying on the lineage of another person. So he's always referred to as, he's a kshetraj, and he's referred to as dve pitah. He knows about it. The interesting part is the kshetraj would always know that he's got 2 fathers. He's a natural father, there's a natural father, and the one who has been appointed. He knows about it. Pandavas know about it all throughout, and others also know about it. And in the context here, in case of the Mahabharata, we have this interesting case of Pandu, who is the product of niyog, an insinuator also of that. And he goes through that kind of a dilemma. He's shown to go through that dilemma. And somehow, yet the final recourse is that to an appointment of a Bijan, as he's called, a Bijan. And the interesting part, as you say, the Mahabharata probably reflected the lived reality of the time, unlike the Ramayana, because that is seemingly more an idealized reflection. So what we find is within the Mahabharata itself, we have voices coming against the practice of niyog. So somewhere Pandavas become, they are there because of niyog, but there is the questioning of this practice, the hedging in of the practice. And in the Dut vacuum, we have Duryodhan saying that I will not give away the 5 villages to the Pandavas precisely because they have been born out of this, which is very interesting because our ancient society has been so obsessed with producing sons that you have 12 forms of sons that are given, and the kshetraj or the product of niyog is just second on the list. The first is Oris, the natural son. The second is kshetraj. So there is a dominance of that kind of an idea, and here Duryodhan is saying, I will not give this heir because they are not the natural sons. And he conveniently forgets that his father has also been born through the same kind of an alliance. And then there is another interesting critique coming from Arjun. Arjun talks about the fact that he's very surprised why did his guru Vasishtha actually have a relationship with King Kalmashpad's wife, Madhyanti. This was happening at behest of the husband. Niyog always happens at behest of the husband or the family. So there is a legitimacy to the child there. So why did my guru enter into that kind of an alliance to produce Asmaka? This is not correct. And again, I would think, how can Arjun think about it? He knows very well that he himself is a product of Manyo, and then he's critiquing it. But again, going by what you say, we are looking at those transitional phases. We're looking at those moments. In the first case, when we're talking about the inheritance part, where marriage becomes very important, is one transition phase. This is yet another transition phase when patriarchy is becoming more important in yoga as a practice, which actually allows, in some sense, it gives us sanction to multiple sexual unions of women is now being frowned upon. So in that sense, we have voices within the Mahabharata that begin critiquing it. The other character I found very interesting to discuss is Shvetaketu. Shvetaketu, I think you're familiar with. He brings in what is called the Maryada law. And you've mentioned it in your text that Shvetaketu is also associated with taming of the wife in some sense and in making her monogamist. Again, very interesting, because you have Draupadi, polyandrous Draupadi, and even Pandavas who are polyandrous, and yet there is an attempt within the text itself to make women monogamous. And that story goes, Shvetaketu is the son of Udala. Both of them are sitting somewhere when a Brahmin comes and forcibly takes away the mother. And when he's taking away the mother, the son is very surprised and he asks, Father, why is he doing that? He says that, oh, let her go. This is the way things are. Women are uncloistered. You can do very little about it. But in the text itself, it is said epic that she is going there unwillingly. She doesn't want to go. And in a fit of rage, then Shvetaketu says, I declare the law of Maryada, and henceforth the woman will remain committed only to one man, and that is to her husband. But when he spells out the law of Maryada, he says that of course she has to remain committed to one individual, but if that individual asks her to cohabit with yet another man, she will have to do it. So he also gives a sanction to Niyog as a practice, and we are not surprised because he himself is a Kshetraj of Udala. So all these, these different forms of reproduction that come forth, they definitely make a very interesting reading here. And as I think you were also taken by Madhavi, and so are you. Madhavi is an interesting character. Nobody should not read it. Everybody should go through it, especially because she has such little space in the text. In the Udyogpal, she comes in for one episode, and then for whatever reason, the mythographers ensure that she is erased completely. And she is the daughter of Yayati. Galav comes, Rishi Galav comes and says that you will have to give me 800 horses of a certain type because I have to give a guru dakshina. And Yayati, who's a giver, he says, I don't have those of horses, but I have a beautiful daughter called Madhavi, and Madhavi, he says, you can take my daughter here and then you exchange it with the horses with any king, and he takes her to the king, and these horses are so scarce that she has to cohabit with not one but with 4 people, for one after another. But she assures, what comes in here is the issue of consent. What takes me in this particular story is the issue of consent. The girl gives consent to her sexual service for the benefit of the father and for the benefit of the larger, issue of the kingdom or the state, because Galav has said, if you don't give it to me, then I'll bring devastation on this kingdom, because he also has that anger in it. And so she's going along with Galav all around, and finally, as you told, that Galav returns her after he gets the number of horses, returns the daughter, and the daughter then is to be married, Swayamvar. Now, in your text, Professor Chakravarti, you do say that's the time when she has found her autonomy. You say that's the time when she is probably getting influenced by the Buddhist ideas. I have a different premise. I'm just asking you if it fits in or not.
I never mentioned that she's influenced by Buddhist ideas.
No, he said. I'm talking about. He's just made that kind of us. You said that this is the occasion when she kind of asserts herself, and there is a sexual autonomy, and she says, I don't want to do anything with them. She decides actually to marry the forest, which means that she renounces. She's still there, she leads a life of a door. She comes back when Yayati needs help, but that's it. Otherwise, she's nowhere there. She's not there in subsequent stories. She's not there in subsequent texts also. While Yayati and all the 4 sons that she has born keep getting repeated in various, Puranas. So my question, what my suggestion, I don't know whether it's a question, suggestion, or an alternative reading to it is, I personally feel that it may not be the occasion for her to assert herself, but it must, or probably has been, her idea of autonomy has been cleverly used by the mythographers of the later day, who would have been so embarrassed by the idea that a king is giving away his daughter for sexual services. So at a time when monogamy is becoming important, later at a time when patriarchy is becoming important, she must be a symbol of embarrassment for them. So they must have twisted the story in such a way that she decides to now become a renunciant, and that solves the issues, because that solves the issues for everybody. She has also become a renunciant, and the father also does not have to go through the practice, and she does not have to remain in the minds of people that, look, there was this woman who's already cohabited 4 men and going to the 5th and the 6th one. I mean, this is the way I would look at it. And also when I talk about Yayati exchanging her, I think we need to remember we're talking probably at a time when there is the exchange society that is there. So the time when the daughters are exchanged from one tribe to another, and she is probably exchanged, she knows about it. वो उसको बोला भी गया, उसके अंदर वस्तु शब्द आया है. उसके लिए जो शब्द आया है वस्तु है, एक ऐसी चीज है मेरे पास, एक ऐसी वस्तु है मेरे पास जिसको आप डिनाई ही नहीं कर सकते हैं. When Galab is talking to her Yashwa and other rulers, so there is the reification of womb that you are talking about. Yes, that is what comes out strongly, but later on, as with the passage of time, her story would have been a matter of embarrassment. And when I told this to set of my students, they said, then how come Draupadi is not a matter of embarrassment? Because she is living with 5 husbands, and it's a polyandrous union in both cases. To that, I would say that Draupadi is the plot pusher. अगर द्रौपदी नहीं होगी तो महाभारत नहीं हो सकता. And that is the case that must have become, the story must have become so concretized very early in the day in the Jai Sahita itself. So, okay. Now you need to tell me also. Just the last point. Okay, the last point is when you talk about Vidur and Rajadharma. And you do state that women probably did not, I'll just, you do inform us that Rajadharma is synonymous to Kshatradharma, but you add that the notion has no space for consent or agency of its women as sexual partners of the kings and its mothers in the Mahabharata. Now, I feel if that were the case, then how do we explain the existence of Vidula and Kunti? You know, in this recall, Vidula's stories recall, when Kunti recalls that, we find both Kunti and Vidula's voices are actually utilized to consolidate the Kshatra Dharma, the Rajadharma enterprise. Vidula's son Sanjay has gone to the battlefield, come back, run away from there, and Vidula says that, no, I will not accept you, you go back. And she says, I hope no mother has a son like you. If you run away from the battle, what use are you to me? You have to be a true Kshatriya, you have to follow your Rajdharma, go back. And this story is actually told at the time when the Pandavas are about to go for the battle. You know, at that point in time, and she's hinting clearly to, not hinting, she speaks clearly to Yudhishthir. She knows Yudhishthir is not going to act. You know, he's one person who is for ahimsa and non-violence, and he says, beware of being following Anvashansya. So she says, no, you can't do. She's preparing him to go ahead and fight. And obviously, and by that you follow your dharma of a Raja. Similarly, Draupadi is forever berating Yudhishthira. We know about that, and he says that you could not pick up the arms when I was humiliated. Not just that, in the Rajadharma Parva of the Mahabharata, Janak's wife, when Janak had decided to renounce and he goes away in the one, the wife follows after a time and says, how have you given up your Rajdharma? You can't do that. Says, no, I'm very unhappy, I have to attain Moksha Dharma now. Says, you can do that, come back, I'll help you in doing that. You have to create that sense of Vairagya within. But before that, you have to follow your Rajdharma and also your duty towards the entire family. So somewhere what I personally feel is that Rajadharam also was based on the voices of women which were well utilized, though I would say that these are mediated voices. At the end of the day, these are the mythographers' voices, but they're making use of voices in the reinforcement of Rajadharam and India. Thank you.